Hi, my name is Frederick Krasey and I'm from the FKC Health YouTube channel, and today I have with me Bill Gasiamis, and Bill is heading up an organisation and has been for some time now called Recovery After Stroke. And Bill has an amazing story to tell. His journey started about 8 years ago, and rather than spoil or steal his thunder, Bill, tell us a little bit about what's going on, what's happened.
Hey, Freddie. Well, lots has happened, mate. But the short version of the story is one February morning in 2012, I woke up with a numb sensation on my big left toe. And I didn't think much of it, but over 7 days, the numbness from the toe spread all the way up to the left side. And by the time I went to hospital to get it checked out, 7 days had elapsed. Wow. And when I went to hospital, they did a CT scan and they discovered that I had a bleed on the brain. And that bleed was caused by a congenital defect in one of my blood vessels. And it's commonly referred to as an arteriovenous malformation. So it's just a malformed blood vessel. And that blood vessel is weaker, and because it's malformed, its due by date is a lot less than normal blood vessels. So it gave way, and as it gave way, started to bleed into the brain. And when I went home from hospital after the first 7 days, I was told to stay out of work and not drive for at least 6 weeks. And after 6 weeks, I was meant to have another appointment. The day before that appointment, I experienced another bleed in the same location. So the blood vessel bled again. And this time the blood vessel released enough blood to make it about the size, the clot in my head, about the size of a golf ball. And that switched off a lot of my cognitive function. It switched off my ability to have short-term or long-term memories. It stopped me from working. It stopped me from driving. It stopped me from, at one point, recognizing my wife when I was in hospital. And it interfered with my life pretty dramatically for about 9 months or so. And then as things started to settle down and the bleeding stopped, the blood in the brain started to get absorbed by the body and started to decrease in size. The clot started to decrease in size. So a lot of my function came back and everything started to go well again, and I thought I was out of the woods. And then what happened was, about almost 3 years after the initial bleed, in November 2014, I experienced a third episode where the blood vessel bled again. And by now, my neurologist and my surgeon said that what that needed to happen was the blood vessel needed to be removed so that it could be eliminated as a source of bleeding, because it could become catastrophic at some point in time. And that meant that I had brain surgery in November 2014. And when I woke up from brain surgery, I couldn't feel my left side properly, and I had to have a month rehabilitation to learn how to walk again and use my left arm. So it was December 2014. I think it was a day or two before Christmas that I came home. And then I was on 6 months of outpatient rehabilitation, which started off about three times a week. And after that, I was pretty much left to my own devices. But that's what happened to me. That's what my story was until about mid 2015.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff happening there. Yeah, that's impactful, Bill, because I've got to know you over the last little while and spend time with you during our behavioural modelling course. And what really impressed me is your powerful, positive leaning into life. So tell me, how long does stroke recovery take, in a sense? It's a strange question, but how long does it take for someone to recover from a stroke, if at all they do?
Well, it's a great question because there's no real answer, and that's the best part about me. I'm not committing to an answer. So that being said, it's not very helpful that there's no answer. But the reality is that every stroke is different, every human being that has a stroke is different, and therefore their recovery is different. So there's some people, very few people, but I must say I've met some of them who would say that they're fully back to normal after a year or two. And it depends on the severity of the stroke and the type of stroke that they experienced and how quickly they got support from a hospital and the type of support that they got. So there's other people that have been on the stroke journey for 30 or 40 years, and it's not abating. Their journey has not stopped. It's not something that's going to go away. So the reason being is because they may have deficits as a result of that stroke that result them being in a wheelchair, or resulted in them not being able to use a particular limb or have memory problems. So if you're unfortunate and the kind of challenges that you experienced are ones that are not able to come back, you're not able to rewire the brain to recover your ability to walk or your arm or use your arm, then unfortunately that's lifelong. It doesn't go away. So my total journey is almost 9 years now. In February next year, it'll be 9 years. And I still live every day with the left side numbness and the pins and needles and the different temperature on my left side and the muscle spasms. And in the morning when I wake up, I have to make sure that my left foot is on the ground. I have to be conscious that I'm putting it there, because it takes a bit longer than me to wake up. So if I put it on the ground and I'm not paying attention, I could lose my balance and fall over. So the short answer is it's different for everybody, and for some people it's lifelong.
Yeah. So what was the worst thing about your stroke?
Wow, the worst thing about my stroke is that I, 37, you get to learn that you're mortal. And not that that is a bad thing to discover that, but to discover that in the frame of mind that I was in and the kind of guy that I was, that was a bit of a shock, that things could possibly come to an end at 37. For me, I had a lot of things that would have been left unsaid, and a lot of apologies that I would never have made, and a lot of I love yous that I would never have said. So that was the worst thing, is having that realization that I literally might not be here tomorrow. And boy, my kids and my family are probably going to think, Bill's a good guy, but he was always cranky, and, he was never happy, and he was always mad. And I think that was the worst part of the stroke for me. And if you ask my wife, she has a different story about what the worst part was for her. But that's the work that I found myself being desperate to do, and the tasks that I needed to fulfill more than anything, so that if the worst happened and I kicked the bucket, well, then I had made good on some outstanding things.
Well, you had when I first met you, you had an interesting phrase which it impacted me. You said your goal was to have people who had had a stroke to say having a stroke was the best thing that ever happened to me. So in that vein of taking that mindset, because it has happened to you, what has stroke taught you?
Yeah, well, what they say, all these, people who inspire us to do massive things is like, have the most massive goal you can possibly have. So I figured, well, I got to that point at some stage in my recovery, probably around year 5 or 6, where I reflected on how far I'd come as a person who had changed in a positive way, and had done all the sorries and had done all the I love yous and was less cranky. And I got to wonder that it's possible that the stroke thing that happened to me, like, that's the best thing that's ever happened to me, because it inspired all this self-reflection and therefore positive change. And people hadn't seen that from me before for my entire 37 years. So I said that the stroke is the best thing that ever happened to me. And then I thought, wouldn't it be good if I could find a way to have other people get to the same point? Now, I have interviewed a lot of people who have said that stroke is the best thing that ever happened to them. And that's despite the severity of the deficits and their disability, and despite the challenges that they wake up with every single day and face every day. And I was astounded that other people were able to say that. Now, I've also had that conversation about my feeling of stroke with other people who can't say that yet. And that's very confronting. For me to say to somebody, wouldn't it be great if stroke was the best thing that ever happened to you? If they're not in that frame of mind, that's extremely confronting. And then if I try to frame it for them in a way which is not confronting, it's to say, yep, stroke's terrible. It put you in a wheelchair. It caused this and it caused that, and it stopped all of these things, and it created all these drama. But amongst all of that, have you become somebody that you can look on and reflect on and see that you have developed and grown as a person? So it's to take a little bit of take from the field of post-traumatic growth and to get them to start delving into what's possible after something so terrible. Is there anything good possible? And if there is, what is that? And if you pursue that for long enough, what will come of that? Will you be able to one day achieve this potential goal of saying that life is better than it has ever been? And therefore, despite my problems and challenges, because everyone in the planet faces problems and challenges, stroke was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it made me turn a corner and it made me go down a different path. And for me personally, the path I was going down was not a good one. And I almost didn't get away with it. I almost didn't end up here. And now, reflecting on the fact that I did get away with it and the fact that I have had this post-traumatic growth, I can honestly say that stroke is one of the best things that's ever happened to me.
You know about Dickens, the story of Ebenezer Scrooge and all that sort of stuff, how he got a second chance. And
yeah.
I get a reflection from talking to you that you're a lad, and you had this stuff going on. But now you've entered a really powerful intellectual space as well that blows my mind. I mean, all the personal development and research and connections you've made, with all the NLP and the behavioral modeling, but all these resources you've tapped into, and the way you articulate yourself now, it's almost if someone knew you when you were 35 or from school and they saw you now, they wonder if you were the same bloke.
Absolutely, they would. They never would have heard me talk about the brain, neurology, psychology, any of those topics that really enhance somebody's well-being, and therefore enables them to have a reflective life, and therefore potentially be the type of person that works on themselves to be better than they were the day before. I was going down the same routine, and it was probably going to be my routine for the next 20 or 30 years, which was wake up in the morning, don't have time to do anything other than drive to the coffee shop, get a coffee, something to eat, go to work, get my work done, go somewhere else after work to do another quote, because I was a tradie, to do another quote, and then come home, do paperwork, yell and scream at my kids because things were not in order and things weren't ready and this wasn't done and that wasn't done, and then sit at the computer, punch those quotes out, and then be completely frustrated and upset and unhappy and completely whinge and bitch and moan about it every single time when I met these people. So at 35, I had become so good at that lifestyle that I was about to take it down for another 20 or 30 years. And it's really sad when I think about myself in that frame of mind. I was so narrow-minded. I was so short-sighted. And I thought that the world owed me something. And I thought that everyone else was to blame.
Wow.
And that's not true. That is not true.
Well, I've listened to some of your presentations before and your podcasts, and I realized that there's so much potential in us all if we just head in a direction. And you're certainly headed in a direction where you're touching lives. So what's good's come out of this. Tell us a little bit about the organisation that you've put together and how it grew up, because I think that story in itself and what you're doing with it and how you're touching lives and what you're seeing, that would be really cool for people watching this to hear a little bit about. So give us a spray on that one.
Yeah, so when I was in hospital in December 2015, when I was getting transferred to rehabilitation, I went into this space called the Transit Lounge, and it was like a transit lounge that you go to a airport, except there was no holiday at the end of this particular bit of transit. And I was getting wheeled through there, and I saw the sign, the Transit Lounge, and I thought, that might be a good name for a podcast, because I felt like I was transitioning from somewhere where I didn't want to be to somewhere where I was wanting to be, which was in recovery to start to get better and get back to life. And basically in 2015, the Transit Lounge podcast was born. And the first 15 or so episodes were about me interviewing other people who had recovered from something serious. And I shared this story of how they overcome their challenges. And then something happened and shifted in my mind, and it went from being the Transit Lounge podcast to recoveryafterstroke.com.
Mm-hmm.
And then it became the Recovery After Stroke podcast. And that's when it took another turn and it went next level. And I started inviting stroke survivors to come on to the podcast and share their story. So since 2015, I've been interviewing stroke survivors, and now there's 120 episodes or more of stroke survivors that I've interviewed that have shared their story. And some of the feedback that I get from it is that they love being on a podcast to share their story, to put it out in the world, to educate the world, to tell them what we are going through and what they are suffering from. And then also to raise awareness of some of the issues. I've had their caregivers and carers on to talk about what they experience and what they suffer from and what troubles them in this whole recovery journey for their loved one or their spouse. And I've had people on there that have had a stroke from as young as in utero, before they were born, to people, to people in their teens, in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, and so on, because stroke doesn't seem to discriminate. And what that's created is a community of people that have come together that now reach out on their own to people others on the other side of the planet and connect with them and start friendships and start their own support groups.
That's cool.
And it's so cool, right? Because somebody in Australia is reaching out to somebody in Hawaii because they had the same kind of stroke, and now they've found somebody that they can talk to about that on a regular basis. So that helps with their well-being, that helps with their healing, that helps with their journey, that helps to have somebody who understands them and keeps them accountable. So the podcast has grown into this thing that now brings so much joy to people all around the world. And there's a new episode every single week. And that means that every year.
What a commitment every week.
Yeah, there's a lot of commitment there. I mean, there has to be, because there's 1 in 6 people are going to have a stroke in their lifetime, Freddie. That's about 18% of the population, which means there's a lot of people that need support, and there's no support out there. Once you come home from hospital, you get outpatient rehabilitation, and there are some services that support people, but a lot of the time there's a lot of gaps that aren't filled. And I feel like my podcast fills those gaps. And my intention with it is so that no other stroke survivor has to do it as hard as I did when I was recovering 8 years ago, because 8 years ago there was 0 podcasts, there was 0 information in the ether about stroke and stroke recovery. So that's what motivates me. And then when you get people contacting you and saying, that was a great episode, thank you for that, I needed to hear that, thank you for sharing that, it was great that this person shared this, when I get those types of responses, I can't not do it. You can't just stop.
I'm in a similar vein. I'm impacted from a different angle, but I'm here with FKC Health providing this platform. A lot of mental health's coming into play. One lady who had some bullying stuff going on and some mental health challenges. She started an organisation, and that's springing up and doing well. What I think would also be great for you to give us some insights in is some of the resources and discoveries you made, like how food and the quality, how that impacts your situation. Not just food, but the whole gamut of what can you do to support what you've been through.
Yeah, so my recovery journey was one of curiosity, and I had no help and no resources. So I tried to find a way to support myself in the recovery so that I could do the best I could do to avoid it happening again. And that made a big difference on the way my recovery went and how I felt about whether I was in control of any part of the recovery. Because usually with stroke, you're really just a bystander. There's a lot of other people doing things around you and helping you and supporting you, but you're not really playing an active role in your recovery and the outcome. So I got curious and I started researching, and the first thing I found, which was the most inexpensive and the easiest thing for me to do, was that I needed to decrease the inflammation that was occurring in my brain. And I realized that food causes inflammation, and the foods that cause inflammation are what I refer to as the fun five. And they are fun to consume and to eat, but they are really detrimental when somebody has a neurological condition. And those fun foods include sugar, caffeine, gluten, dairy, and alcohol. And what they do is they interfere with the recovery because they cause inflammation in the body. And the brain is already inflamed, and what we don't want to do is make matters worse by adding foods that inflame the brain. So I discovered those one at a time and not all together. So slowly I started to stop consuming sugar. And then I noticed that I felt very different. The levels of neurological fatigue decreased. I was able to be more energetic. I was able to not have these energy slumps and these energy spikes. And my mind started to clear, and a lot of the fogginess and grogginess went away. And then I thought, well, that's great. I wonder if there's more things that I could do. And then I discovered the same thing about caffeine and how it artificially stimulates us in the morning, and then how it potentially can interfere with our sleep. So I stopped drinking caffeine and noticed a significant change in the way that I was feeling, my mood, and my addiction to caffeine became evident because I went through a little bit of a withdrawal.
Do you still have coffee, or is it totally out?
Well, 5 or 6 years down the track, I still have coffee, but I didn't have coffee for a good four years. And I think that was the critical time, because that's when the most recovery was happening. It was when the blood was in my brain and after brain surgery. And about 2 years after brain surgery, I kind of thought, I love the social aspect of a coffee. So if I'm going to go out with somebody and we're going to have a coffee, I'm not going to say no. I have changed from dairy milk to almond milk to try and decrease the amount of dairy that I consume. So that's made it possible for me to consume caffeine again. And I only have one a day. And it's usually around, it's usually an hour or two after I've woken. So I don't have it to wake up. I just have it because it's lovely to have. And it's not something that I suggest that people refrain from doing forever. Just in that critical time, when recovery is important. And then I just moved on to gluten, and I just also then moved on to alcohol. And alcohol was the one thing that I can say that since I stopped consuming alcohol, maybe in February of 2012, it'd be fair to say that maybe I've drunk 1 liter of alcohol in the last 8 years. And that's all over a small amount of time with, small amounts of drinks, just again, so that when I'm at a party, I can just feel like I'm part of it. But for a good 5 or 6 years, I completely abstained from drinking alcohol. And the thing about alcohol is that when I drink it, I feel like I'm having another stroke again.
Oh
So
my
it's no
God.
fun, you know,
Yeah.
it's no fun. My left side goes to sleep and it's no fun. It just reminds me of then. So if I'm going to have it, I'm going to have a half a glass of a beer, and that's enough just so that I can feel like I'm part of the conversation, because alcohol is this really huge emotional thing and people do it together. And when you're not doing it, it's really difficult for the others to understand why. And they put a lot of what I call peer group pressure, but they do it from a loving kind of place, not from a place of, they don't want you to feel left out. They're not
I
doing it from a place of giving you a hard time.
I am in the same place with alcohol. I'd be lucky to drink a dozen stubbies in a year, if that. And
Yeah.
that's going right out to the parameters. I don't like alcohol. It doesn't work for me. Yeah, so I totally respect that. Tell us a little bit about how you're reaching out through your process, your podcast, a bit about your infrastructure and what your aim is moving forward. Because I think seeing the way you've grown, because I've known you for about, a year now? About
Yeah.
And in that year, what I've seen has just really impressed upon me as an example of what I can start to build as well. So yeah, let's hear a bit about where you're headed with what you've got in your vision.
Yeah. So where I've headed is I've started to tell people that that I can help coach them on their recovery journey. And it's usually to address those issues that they haven't addressed. And what I've found is that stroke recovery is very key on the physical recovery. And that makes sense, right? Because people limbs stop working properly. So they do the physical recovery and they put all their time and effort in that. But they very rarely do the emotional recovery. And the emotional recovery is 1/3 of the recovery. And if we don't do that, we're missing a key chunk of the recovery, because the emotional recovery is often dealing with trauma associated to their experience, but also those old traumas from the past that turn up and rear their ugly heads. So as a stroke recovery coach, I help people navigate the journey of the internal recovery. The physical recovery is something that can be done by the physiotherapists and the occupational therapists, but they don't work on that other part of the recovery, the emotional recovery. And we also tackle some of the challenges around mindset and around how they're going about their recovery, how they talk about themselves. And we talk about a recovery mindset as opposed to just going about this recovery and trying to get back to normal, get back to life as it was before. Because if your key goal is to get back to life before stroke, that was just before you had a stroke. So that wasn't a good life to get back to. And there's a good chance that what's going to happen is you're going to create the perfect environment for another health challenge. And we don't want to do that. We want to get you an enhanced life and lifestyle. So I've got 10 key pillars that we focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And they are the recovery mindset. We talk about emotional intelligence and the heart brain. We talk about the second brain, which is in the gut brain. We talk about neuroplasticity and how to use neuroplasticity to enhance their recovery. And I make people aware of negative neuroplasticity, which is not a commonly spoken about thing, but negative neuroplasticity is that learned helplessness, the learned non-use of a limb. And people often don't realize that by taking the easy way out in their stair climb, for example, and taking the elevator or the lift, that perhaps they are teaching their limb that's affected to not really work for getting better at climbing stairs. So we talk about negative and positive neuroplasticity, and we focus on sleep as being the most important thing to do to heal the brain, is to learn how to improve and enhance your sleep. And then once we've sort of tackled those things, we dive into food for thought and brain nutrition. Now, at the beginning, we obviously suggest to the people going on that journey to cut down on sugar, to cut down on caffeine and alcohol and all that kind of stuff. And we just gloss over that just to give them a general feel for why. But then in Food for Thought and Brain Nutrition, we really deeply dive into the reasons why, to convince them beyond doubt that in that recovery phase, they need to abstain from those types of foods so that they can support their brain health. And then we get into encouraging people to get physical and to look for local resources to continue supporting their physical recovery. And then I love to take people into this space of heart meditation, heartful meditation instead of mindful meditation, which is a different concept. And we bring people and get them connected to their heart so their emotional recovery can continue to evolve and emerge. And then we talk about how we can support people to find their purpose in life so that the stroke and the challenges that it created, right, was this thing that was worthwhile. And as a result, we have been able to find a purpose, and now we're living that purpose. And if you can't tell, I found my purpose and I'm living my purpose, right? So once we've done that, then what we want to do is build a massive tribe, a massive community around that organization, around those people, I beg your pardon, so that they can feel loved, supported, guided. And not only they feeling it, but they're also giving that to those people that are following them and learning from them. And that part is the part, Freddie, that I did that I never expected, which was when I started the podcast, it was selfish. It was about me. But what's come from it is that I'm getting way more from it, hearing the positive feedback that other people are getting from it. And that's just driving me even more, motivating me even more. So building your tribe and community is the next and final stage. And then what we do is at every stage, we just have conversations and talk. And I try to be a very loving and caring accountability buddy to see where people are on their journey, where they want to start. And then I just help hold their hand, so to speak, and guide them down the path of achieving their goal, whatever their goal or outcome is.
That's fantastic, Bill. I mean, you've inspired me every time I've met you and listened to what you've been through. I can identify with some of those challenges. I've got my own story. I won't bring it here, but I've gone through something similar. And I think to see the potential, it's not just what you've been through. It's not just where you're at. You've got so much energy and potentiality, and it rubs off onto other people. And when you light them up, I know how rewarding that is for you, because it's like everyone's asleep and you're saying, hey, wake up, wake up. And, I think it's why you took responsibility really for your stroke recovery, because all these people looking in on you, what were they going to do for you? They'll push you through the mental health system, they'll wheel you around and they'll feed you. But really, it's got to be an internal revelation, an internal responsibility. So from your perspective, why is it important to take that responsibility?
That's a really awesome thing that you said, because nobody knows you like you. And your doctor hopefully has never had a stroke and therefore doesn't understand specifically what's necessary for the recovery. And they do their best from what they've learned and the years that they have experienced, but they could be a veteran. All they really can do for you is plug you up, patch you up, and send you home. That other part is your part. That is what you have to do. You've got to look within. They can't force you or make you look within. You've got to do that. The recovery is not when you got home with the hole in your head plugged up or the blockage removed. That's not when the recovery starts. It starts when you go home and now you've got this new version of yourself that you don't identify with. And somehow you've got to accept that and you've got to come to terms with that. And it's not going to happen. Nobody else is going to make that happen for you. You're the only person that has to come to a point of finding acceptance in your heart and then looking for creative ways to enhance your life despite the deficits that you've experienced.
Well, that's why I was so moved to invite you to share this, because you have all these different 10-step programs and 12-step programs. And when we were formulating up what we were going to do to bring out to the world, I can see that even somebody who's gone through something else like trauma or a nervous breakdown or some major setback, they too could map across a huge percentage, if not all, of your learnings of strategy of facing into life. So I think what you've got is a gold star program, and I really believe it's going to take the world by storm. So tell me, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, it's called 10 Steps to Brain Health for Stroke Survivors because my community understands me and I understand them. And everyone I've spoken to who's not a stroke survivor look at it and go, well, that maps off into cancer recovery, that maps off into heart recovery, that maps off into all these other things. And I'm going like, probably, but I don't get how, because I'm not one of those people. But I understand the general nature of the topics that I'm talking about. But I'm really focusing in on narrowing my conversation to stroke survivors because I understand them more than any other person, because I'm one of them. And we can have really unique and informative conversations around what's necessary to have a successful recovery. And how you measure success is not whether or not you went back to your life the same way that it was before stroke.
This is fascinating stuff, Bill, and I think we'll reapproach you again to come back again and share even more as you refine your models, your processes for people, and maybe some case studies and stories will be interested next time around the block. So how can people get in touch with you? Because I really feel you're going to touch a chord here. So how do people reach you?
The best way is to go to recoveryafterstroke.com and or send an email to bill@recoveryafterstroke.com. I answer all my emails personally. I look forward to receiving them. And at the website, they can get a feel for, there's a free download there, a PDF, which somebody can download. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. So that's a way to inform yourself about what's happened to you and take a more active role in the discussions with your doctor. And then there's some courses that people can download. They're as cheap as $1 and as expensive as $49. And in those courses, people will be able to attend that course, but also then ask a question and get me to respond to them so they can interact with me. And there's also a section there that they can fill out a form to be a guest on the podcast just by going to the contact area. And they can listen to the podcast. It's called Recovery After Stroke, and it's free on all of the places where you can download podcasts from.
Wow. Well, thank you, Bill, for coming on and sharing this stuff. I'm touched that you give us this time and open your life and your experience up so much. So heads up to you, and we'll be including your links, for your website and social links. I'll get them off you, and they'll go into the notes under the video. So there you have it, listeners. Here's an incredible man who's had a journey that most people would not understand, but there are so many that would. And I just encourage you to hit this guy up and find out more, because even looking in from the outside, I've learned so much myself just being associated with you, Bill. So thank you.
Thank you, Freddie. My great pleasure, mate. Thanks for asking me.
It's a pleasure, mate.